Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition, and we have a lot to talk about: economic news and maybe even some good news for farmers because of the trade wars. Also, we're going to be looking at some social media issues as well as what is happening in the political campaigns. But most importantly, we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about First Amendment and religious liberty. Penna, Dexter with me, and well, it was good news for the economy, but for Mark Zuckerberg, it was a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week. So the economy up and Facebook down. $119 billion loss in one day. Hard to believe.
Biggest loss in stock market history. But, you know, it's kind of like high-stakes poker watching the trade issue with this administration.
Sure.
But today, of course, the announcement just this morning, second quarter gross domestic product jumped by 4.1%. Last quarter, the first quarter of the year, was 2.2%. So really to see that, you know, there's a lot of factors, of course, that are involved in it, and the Trump administration is taking credit because of their rollback of regulations. And, you know, the media, though, has an explanation. It's because of Trump's tariffs. The soybean growers rushed to export their products, and that's what is responsible for this jump in GDP. But, you know, I really think that we're going to see some pain. We're going to see some drag. And I know that Jerry Tuma talked about some of that yesterday. But and I'm no economist, so I can't predict what's going to happen. And most economists can't either, by the way. But it's very interesting to watch this. And then, of course, we had the announcement this week of a trade deal with Europe. And, you know, Wilbur Ross, who's the Secretary of Commerce, says that this happened because Trump actually started the game with tariffs on steel and aluminum. And we've had, you know, tariffs that people have been very disturbed about, especially a lot of members of Congress who are running for re-election.
That's right.
But now we have a couple of positive developments this week. So it's very interesting to watch.
Well, again, Commerce Secretary certainly excited about that. Of course, the president very excited about the 4.1% actual growth. And as you said, the argument is maybe this was get the exports in before the tariffs start. Maybe. I think that has some merit. But the other one that was being discussed today by the president is the lowest unemployment ever. And he goes through this whole long list: lowest unemployment for African Americans, lowest unemployment for Hispanic Americans. This one I did not know: lowest unemployment for Asian Americans. And he said before it's all through, it probably will be the lowest unemployment for women in the workforce. It'll take a few more weeks, he said. And again, we have some that come up with arguments against that. One is that, well, the reason unemployment is so low is because people are working 2 and 3 jobs. Bottom line is that PolitiFact, which is a left-leaning fact checker, said that's one of those ones that's not just false, but it's pants on fire false. So if you hear that one said, and Elizabeth Warren has said that, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been saying that, that's not the case. So we'll see how it plays out. But right now, if people are upset about the economy, it's because they're the few that are left behind. But I would imagine that most people right now are seeing some positive change in terms of their take-home income in terms of the tax cuts. Maybe some entrepreneurs are feeling like it's a good time to start a business, entrepreneurial. So if nothing else, that may bode well for the Republicans in November, but it's still a long way from here to November, isn't it?
It is. And, there are members of Congress right now that want to sort of draw back authority over tariffs and trade from the executive branch because the executive branch has a lot of leeway there. So they're working on that in Congress. And as these events kind of tumble down and begin to take place, you wonder what Congress will do. I know they're very worried about re-election, and there are several members of Congress who for instance, I saw something in the paper today about Kentucky bourbon.
Yes.
Of course, bourbon has had its tariffs raised on it. And so, the person that's running from an area in Kentucky where they produce bourbon, he's worried. And so you have all of those things. But I don't like to see the administration micromanage the economy. But I also like to see free trade work. So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, and again, a good example of that is that what you had with the European Union is, as you pointed out, duties which were on blue jeans, Kentucky bourbon, Harley Davidson motorcycles, orange juice, rice, and corn. So, obviously it's not just Kentucky bourbon, but, if you have a lot of rice coming out of the North Carolina, South Carolina region, that is the case. But nevertheless, just the fact that you had some movement from the EU suggests that, as you said, it's a high-stakes game. But nevertheless, it does seem like the chief poker player at the moment is winning some of those high-stakes ventures, and so that is certainly the case. Kelly Shackelford has been stuck in traffic, but he's with us right now, and we were talking about a 4.1% GDP. What do you think about that?
I think it's incredible, especially when you look at the statements made about how he was going to destroy the economy as president and how we were going to go into a recession. I mean, there's all those quotes from the Democratic leaders and some of the editorial writers because, they didn't like Trump and they thought he was just going to ruin everything. He's a buffoon. He's doing pretty well in the economy. I mean, this is and I think it's just the beginning. I heard I forget who it was today, but one of his officials that was talking about this and said that he thinks this is, if you really go back into the 90s to the last time there was a real prosperity sort of boom. And his prediction was this is the beginning of that. And I think he might be right. They were saying you couldn't get up to a 2 or a 3 GDP. And we just hit 4. And they were talking about maybe even a 5. And so it really is incredible what happens when you begin to pull regulations, government over-regulation off of people who are starting their business and trying to get into the market and all these things. And you provide tax relief. All of a sudden, and all that capital that was brought back into the United States.
There you go.
Because of the taxes that now was being invested here. It's incredible to see what happens and those free market principles. The thing this guy said that I thought was very interesting is he said millennials have never lived through a prosperity boom like that. And they're really beginning to see it for the first time. I think that could be really instructional. You got all this talk about how many of the younger people think that socialism is good. I think they're about to learn that no, the free market economy is good. It allows for freedom. It allows for innovation. It allows for prosperity. It blesses everyone because in a free market economy, those who serve the best are the ones who succeed. As Facebook is learning the wrong way right now. And so I think it's great news for our country, and I really do think it's probably just the beginning.
Well, let's take a break. And as I pointed out earlier, Mark Zuckerberg had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week. And so it may have been good news for the economy, but a plummet of $119 billion is just breathtaking and an illustration of that as well. If you go to our website, you're going to notice we posted quite a few articles on the issue of religious liberty. And it turns out that a lot of these people are people that work with you, Kelly. So we're going to work through some of those articles. Don't you think that's kind of fun?
I think that's perfect.
People that we've had sitting around the table, and here they are, Town Hall and a variety of other places. Washington Examiner, so we're going to talk about that as well. We've got a lot to cover today, and we will do so right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Media critics have for years decried the proliferation of fake news and have been especially critical when quotes and comments were ripped out of context. J.J. McCullough recently wrote about another related issue that isn't given enough coverage. A liberal press often runs photos that are obviously ripped out of context. Now, since he is a Canadian, McCullough begins his piece by talking about a deceptive photo of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Donald Trump. They're seated in those two famous chairs in the Oval Office. Trump is extending his hand for a handshake, and Trudeau is merely looking at his hand. The photo went viral because it showed Trudeau's dislike of Trump and his unwillingness to shake the president's hand. But that's not what happened. The damning photo was surgically extracted from a split second in which Trump's hand extended just before Trudeau's rose to meet it. Of course, that's not what the photo showed. Which brings us to the worst editorial photograph of the year. John Moore accompanied the U.S. Border Patrol to the bank of the Rio Grande to get a photograph of what he believed would convey the emotional impact of family separation. He took a picture of a toddler crying as her mother from Honduras was patted down by border agents. The picture went viral because it showed the pain of separating children from their parents at the border. There's just one problem. The mother and daughter were not separated. They were detained since she is seeking asylum. The photo not only went viral, but Time magazine put the same image of the child on the cover with President Donald Trump under the caption, "Welcome to America." We're told that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Unfortunately, we're also seeing that a photo ripped out of context can be as erroneous as fake news. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and so often we talk about what is happening at First Liberty, and since many of you are in the area, I thought it would be especially fun for you to have a chance to hear about some of the other individuals at First Liberty. And the first article we've posted here, Penna, is by Hiram Sass. Was somewhat review because we've talked about that, but I have run into still people that will ask me, I've heard that Brett Kavanaugh's really not that strong on religious liberty. There were a couple of articles that came out somehow that started that the ball roll in the wrong direction. So I really appreciate Hiram summarizing some of the things we've talked about here and providing an article that you can pass on to your friends if somebody's saying, I really don't think he's going to be that helpful to us. What'd you think, Penna?
Well, yeah, I saw the article, and Kelly mentioned this, I think, last week, that he actually volunteered his time to work with you, Kelly, and also Jay Sekulow on the Santa Fe, I remember this case, Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe, and it was about student-led, student-initiated prayer before high school football games, and I think you lost that case, right?
Yes.
Yeah, we lost that case at the Supreme Court, but he worked on it on the right side.
He was on the right side. It was... Again, that's one of the reasons why it's so important who's on the court, because that court is, changing and moving in the right direction. But yeah, somebody who, when they're a young attorney, we're talking almost 20 years ago, when they're rising their career and they're willing to actually give their time to work on religious freedom. I mean, that's a person who really is committed to religious freedom in the Constitution, and he did that not only once, he did that a number of times. He did it also in the Good News Club case. So I think it's clear you can't question Brett Kavanaugh's heart, his passion, his commitment for religious liberty and the Constitution. And I thought the picture they caught by cell phone, the night he was
cute, yeah.
The night he was actually, there with the president. Later that night, he's at his church feeding the homeless.
That was so fun.
And so just good guy. And so, everybody hears his credentials, which are impeccable.
Yeah.
Very bright, very brilliant, and has incredible decisions on, the Second Amendment, on the administrative state and its lack of power over people. And but a lot of people don't talk about religious freedom. He's got a lot of opinions. The Priest for Life case was one of them. The one where they challenged the oath in the inauguration. So help me God or under God. I forget which one it was. I think it was So help me God. Excellent opinions on all those things. He's been solid and done a really good job of making sure the Constitution and religious freedom is protected.
There's one case, it's actually not decided yet before the court that he's on. The D.C. Circuit Archdiocese of Washington versus Washington Metro Area Transit Authority. It was talking about placing advertisements on the buses around the Christmas holiday. And so the Washington basically rejected the proposal to do this by saying advertisements that promote or oppose any religion, religious practice, or belief are prohibited, even around Christmas time. Amazing. And he asked some really good questions at oral argument, Kavanaugh did. He used the term pure discrimination, his quote, odious to the First Amendment. So obviously he believes that these should be upheld, these ads in the buses. And this is just another piece of evidence for Kavanaugh that he would be, I think, a friend on religious liberty on the court.
Yeah, we actually filed an amicus brief in that case, the Washington Metro case. They essentially said, they said in the case that you could celebrate Christmas and have an ad secularly, but you can't have one that's religious. So you can't have an ad that even mentions Jesus or baby Jesus or anything. And so that's just clear discrimination. And again, this is a case that's actually before Judge Kavanaugh's court right now. And I kind of hope he rules before he goes to the Supreme Court so we get a good decision.
But what we are hearing, and this was disturbing to me this week, of course, is that there's going to be, or there have been, requests for so many documents from him, from Kavanaugh's time in the Bush administration, which aren't even relevant to this, because it might be relevant if that's all he had. But he has 12 years on the D.C. Circuit, so he has 300 opinions, and that in itself should be enough.
That should be more than enough
to decide, because those are really, that's the record.
What they're asking for is it's not like, they've already got the stuff they needed last time. He's already been through.
Yeah, so it's not like this is new.
So what they're doing now is there's a position for the president, one of the lawyers, that kind of just is kind of the correspondence cop. Everything that comes through, they just okay it. And they're just there to kind of make sure legally everything's okay. So they really don't exercise any sort of judgment in making decisions or whatever. That's what they're like. And of course, it's gazillions of things. It's just like millions of pages, and it shows you nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't tell you anything.
And so this is just a way for them to try to slow things down, to see if they can push this on. It's not going to work because McConnell controls all this. So but it shows you a little bit that they don't have anything on Brett Kavanaugh, because this is their tactic. It's not, look at this opinion he wrote, or look at this, he's not a judge. He's just going to push his own views on the bench, not be a judge. He's going to be a legislator. No, you don't hear any of those things. It's all, we want all this paper. It's all things that don't have to do with what an incredible judge he'd make. Even a liberal Yale law professor, very well known,
yes, I saw that,
came out and said, look, he would be excellent. So it's just hard. They're really in a box.
Yeah, I think what this really is it's for your campaign. It's the Democrats running and wanting to look like they're opposing this, even though they know the writing's on the wall.
So it's pretty certain. I can't think of anybody I've interviewed over the last 2 weeks who's talked about this who thinks that this would be postponed till after the midterms.
No,
especially with the Senate is not taking a break, right? So
That's
that's
right.
going to be kind of interesting.
No, I think it's important that, I mean, everything's going well, but for instance, Grassley is the one who heads the Judiciary Committee, and he's been excellent on this, following what McConnell's approach as well. And he said, we're going to get this judicial confirmation done before October, because that's when the court begins to sit again. And there's no reason it shouldn't be. It usually takes 60 to 65 days. But like, for instance, Grassley's going back into his home state right now, and there's like 4 or 5 public appearances or whatever. People need to go there and say thank you for doing this. It's really important that we have good justices, and this is a very incredibly qualified, bright jurist with a lot of opinions, and to not allow all this silliness to go on and instead to move people through, allow people to ask the questions they want to ask, but to move it through. I think people, like that are from Iowa ought to figure out a way to go and thank him, because this is I think it's the most important out of all the good things that are happening, and there are a number of very good things happening under the new administration. We've got the economy today. We've got the regulations. We've got the Jerusalem is now, or the embassy. We just go on and on and on, right? I think, to me, the most important thing is all the excellent justices and judges we're getting on the court for life. And Grassley is the chairman of that committee. And so I think people who are doing good things need to be told thank you and encouraged to really hold the line, because they're being pressured not to.
Yes. Well, and again, we've tried to illustrate the fact it's not just to the Supreme Court. It seems like there's hardly a week goes by where I'm not quoting from James Ho, Judge James Ho. This week we are quoting from a case that went to the Fifth Circuit Court. And first it went to the 3 judges, and then they asked for it to go en banc, which means go to the entire group. Now, there's supposed to be 17, but there's only 15 right now. And they actually lost 8-7, although now Trump has put on another individual, so I think it'd be 8-8, and then when they put one more, it'll be 9-8. But nevertheless, even in his dissent, you got to love James Ho, because he's saying, now wait a minute, this law says that you cannot buy guns across state lines, but we would really have problems if you weren't allowed to buy books across state lines. That's the First Amendment. So why can't we buy guns across the state line if that's the Second Amendment? The logic and the way he communicates, I think I quote him every week so far.
He's brilliant. Young, clerk for Justice Thomas, and he's an example of one of these judicial appointments by the president that is going to be there for life. And I think he's already shown in 6 months, he's going to be an excellent, excellent, excellent judge. And we've got a bunch of these going on in the courts. And so it's really important that, that be kept. Now, of course, that could all change depending upon the elections, because the Senate has to confirm these judges.
That's right.
And so that's why the Senate's so important in the elections. People talk about the House going from Republican to Democrat. To me, the bigger issue is the Senate instead of the House.
I think so. We need to take a break. When we come back, though, we have a piece by Mike Berry as well, and it's First Amendment protects community involvement of pastors. So if you're a pastor, you especially want to listen, but if you're concerned about your church, you want to hear that as well. We'll take a break and talk a little bit more about that article, which is on our website as well, right after these messages.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on, with all the media, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys. And what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to leave a note, of course, we also broadcast on Facebook Live, and some of you leave a note. I'll read those a little bit later. And, of course, we also have posted lots of articles, and if you scroll down a little bit further, you'll see one by Mike Berry. If you've listened to this program any length of time, you know that he is with First Liberty and actually is the head of the Military Affairs Division in First Liberty. also a former Marine officer. But Penna, in this case, he's not so much looking at the military issues as much as just looking at issues that affect almost all of our listening audience, because if you're not a pastor, you're in a church that has a pastor. And this was, I think, a good illustration of why we need groups like Religious Liberty, First Liberty, and other religious liberty groups.
Well, that's because we have other groups that are out there just looking for little violations, like the Freedom of Religion from Religion Foundation. But this particular story is about Connor McKay, and he's a pastor, and he played football. So his old coach asked him to come back and speak to the team. And when he did, it was inspirational. He used one scripture from Proverbs: as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. Well, guess who came after him? Freedom from Religion Foundation. They said it was a constitutional crisis, and they sent a letter to the school district. They complained, and they said, well, the coach invited an evangelist to preach to players. And so that was, I guess, a bad thing. So that's the case there that Mike writes about in this story. And, it just brings up the issue, I think, of pastors' rights to speak. I mean, they have freedom of speech just like everyone else.
I love how it opens up. Did I break the law? That's a question Connor McKay has. You have heard that, Kelly, so many times. People that are maybe even a little bit fearful that they're going to go to jail or something because they dared to say something religious in a public forum.
Yeah, and first let's lay out what the law is here. Does somebody have a right, at the school who's speaking about character or whatever the issue is, to use, a quotation from Shakespeare or scripture or whatever they want? Yes. Now, if the school were to ban him from speaking because he mentioned a biblical quote, that would be a violation. Okay. Or if they said, oh no, we don't let pastors speak, that would be a violation. Okay. Those are discrimination. So the Freedom from Religion Foundation, as usual, has it completely backwards. Their name gives it away. There is no freedom from religion, just like there's no freedom from speech. Part of living in a free society is you hear things that you disagree with and you see things that you disagree with. But in the freedom from religion world, there's a religious cleansing, and, people are discriminated against because they're religious. Thank goodness that that's not our country. And so a pastor can speak. Yeah, can you have somebody talk to students? And if, and this scripture, by the way, it wasn't like, and Jesus said, right? It was, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. It's just ridiculous to even complain about this. So I congratulate the school district because they have not responded to Freedom from Religion's pleas to do something about this. They're smart, and they're following the law by not discriminating and saying, what Connor did is perfectly okay.
It's good to write about this, though, because there is this intimidation factor across the country in schools, especially among school authorities. They worry about lawsuits, and they worry about spending money. They worry about publicity and all of that. And so they need to look at this and say there's freedom of speech and freedom of religion. People can speak of religious points. They can make religious points. They can use scripture. And it's not a violation of the Constitution.
One of the things I was going to mention is when they click on your picture, Kelly, or go to the See More, that can take them to First Liberty. And if they click on resources, there is a resource for individuals that might be either a student or a teacher. And the reason I thought this would be good to bring up is we're still in July, but you know what happens in August? School starts again.
That's right.
And lots of times what happens is just as they sometimes have a baccalaureate at the end of the school year, sometimes they have some kind of, if you will, beginning that is almost certainly going to have somebody quoting a scripture verse or using a biblical allusion. And if they just sit them, and I don't want them asking the same question, did I break the law? This is the way the article starts. You do have some resources that people can obtain, don't they?
Yeah, they can just go to firstliberty.org, as you say, go to pointofview.net and click on the picture and go there. And under resources, we have, what are your rights in the schools and as a teacher, as a student? What are your rights in the military with regard to your faith? We're dealing with some just ridiculous cases that we're having to fight right now in the military.
Yes.
What
keeps Mike Berry busy, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I probably saw the new controversy this last week of removing the Bible from the table.
Yes, I found that one on your app. Can we talk about that in just a minute?
Yeah,
too? Yeah,
it's just you can't even believe it. So Mike was on Todd Starnes earlier this week talking about it, and it's sad that some of these people are backing down when the law doesn't in nowhere supports that. And so that's what's good about the situation with Connor is he talked to those young men. He did nothing wrong, and the school district, basically took the Freedom from Religion Foundation letter and threw it right in the trash can, which is exactly what you do. And that's what most people do, but all it takes is a few people to kind of get nervous and cave, and then all of a sudden people's rights are violated.
Okay, well, this is the Air Force Base, and of course there's another lovely group called the Military Religious Freedom Foundation. This is Mikey Weinstein. And this group, the piece that Todd Starnes wrote, it, the MRFF is easily triggered by public displays of Christianity on military installations. They were triggered because there was this POW MIA table.
I know. This is just amazing to me.
And, they put a Bible there. And Mikey and his group said, no, you need to take that off and put a book of faith because you don't want non-religious people to feel excluded.
You can't make this up. First of all, I did mention something in passing that we should give some credit to, and that is, as much as I go to your website, now I have the First Liberty app on my phone. And so that's where I actually saw this on your app. So let me just encourage some of our listeners, if you've got a smartphone, if you certainly have got an iPhone, just go to the App Store, go to First Liberty, and you will see this app, and you have the articles there, and that's what got my attention. I did not know about this story about the Bible on the POV MIA table until I saw it on your app.
Let me ask a logical question here. If you're Mikey Weinstein and you run an organization, you live in your mom's home and you've never done a lawsuit in your life, and you go around just trying to scare people and all this, and you come up with this approach that we've got here a table, with a rifle and all these things to represent a soldier who's gone, and which obviously you're going to probably put some sort of religious book or something to represent.
This was a table for POWs.
Exactly.
I know.
And you but here's the thing that just blows my mind. You put a Bible there. It's like, oh, no. You got to take the Bible off. We've got to put a book of faith. Aren't you still telling people who are not people of faith that if his argument is you can't have anything religious because people who are non-religious won't like it, then the book of faith does the same thing. So what's wrong with the Bible? It just doesn't make any sense. Again, it's this approach of instead of a society that is full of people of faith and not of faith, and therefore you see things of faith.
Right.
He wants a religious cleansing society where religion is banned and people are attacked and imprisoned because of their religion. In fact, he has a quote a while back where they asked him his goal in the military. This is Mikey Weinstein. And he said 400 heads on a stick. And they said, what are you talking about? And he said, I want 400 people who share their faith in the military I want their heads on a stick. So his goal is wiping out religious freedom and expression, and this is a great example of it. Of course, there's a Bible on the table for POWs. A significant part of people involved with POWs is faith. There's prayer. There's all kinds of things about the eternal. Those who don't believe that, they can enjoy the rifle or enjoy something else on the table. But the point is, we're a pluralistic society. We have lots of monuments and symbols around the country. Some are religious, some are secular, because that's who we are as a country.
I interviewed Mikey one time. I was in a studio. It was this tiny little studio doing a live radio show. He is one intense guy, and he's so afraid of leaders in the military who may be a Christian using too much pressure on someone to be religious. That's his point. that religious leaders in the military are going to try to make the military a Christian organization, which is so far from what's going on. He's kind of a scary guy, but he's really kind of a lumpy guy, too.
We'll be right back.
If you are a middle child or a parent of one or more middles, you are becoming increasingly rare. Every child born after the first and before the last is technically a middle. In an article in New York Magazine, culture editor Adam Sternberg makes the startling revelation that the American middle child is now an endangered species. He explains the demographics. As the ideal number of children per family has shrunk to 2, the middle child, in a very real sense, is disappearing. He cites a Pew Research Center study done in 1976, which found that the average mother at the end of her childbearing years had given birth to 3 or more children. Today, nearly 2/3 of women with children have 2 or 1. This is the norm across the nation and for every demographic group. Millennials are marrying later. Women are waiting longer to have children. But Adam Sternberg explains that this really boils down to what couples think they can afford. 3 kids, which a generation ago was considered a slightly smaller brood than ideal, now seems aspirational, even decadent. Most of Mr. Sternberg's article laments what we as a culture will lose as the cohort of middle children dwindles. They are natural mediators. They often have to work harder to be noticed and are more likely to take risks than the oldest or the youngest. One term that is almost never applied to middle children is spoiled. The writer wonders, do we really want a world with fewer diplomats? Or fewer hardy types whose upbringing gives them a knack for empathy? Birth order expert and popular author Kevin Lehman says that this evaporation of middle children is a loss for all of us. Middle children, he says, are like the peanut butter and jelly in the sandwich. If you like a sandwich with nothing on it, enjoy. Really good things often require a leap of faith. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you would like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're talking about the military case there just a minute ago, and it reminded me of a conversation I had years ago with Herb Titus. You might remember him. He was at CBN University, and he used to be with the ACLU. And he said, you know, one of the reasons the ACLU was able to get so much traction is lots of times they would go into court, they would lose a precedent, but they kept coming back, and there wasn't really any opposition. There wasn't anybody pushing back. And for a while, I got the sense that Mickey Weinstein has been that way, but then, it changed a little bit. You know, Mike Berry showed up, and it's easy to run up and down the field when you have offense and there's no defense. You know, when I go play basketball and I'm just shooting by myself, boy, do I look good. But as soon as somebody got a hand in my face, I can't do so well. And it seems to me that some of the reason why some of this insanity, Penna, that used to exist has tamped down is because of people like Mike Berry.
It was brilliant strategically for First Liberty Institute to add a pillar to what they do there, military religious freedom, because it's where it's attacked in a top-down part of the culture. And to bring Mike Berry, of all people, in was also a good move.
Mike, is an incredible guy. I mean, he's argued more cases before the military highest court than anybody else around. So he's very experienced. He taught at the Naval Academy. Just a, tremendous guy with great experience. And so what we found happening was Mikey Weinstein and his group would make these allegations or complaints or letters or whatever. And the military, which was kind of weird, especially the Air Force for some reason, but a number of the military would get worried and they would cave. They would take the Bible out of the room. They would take the painting off the wall. They would do these things. And all of a sudden, when Mike Berry showed up, when Mikey Weinstein would complain about something, Mike Berry would say, well, here's what the regulations say and what the law says and what the DOD policy says. And all of a sudden, you would look and you'd go, well, Mike Berry is right, and this guy didn't know what he's talking about. And that kept happening over and over again. So and we started noticing that the letters from Mikey Weinstein really didn't have much impact anymore. And so it's rare to find a colonel like this colonel in this situation who just totally caved. She really made a bad mistake. And I think Mike Berry's story about one of the POWs and how important his faith was in getting him through that was a great example of why we have a Bible on those tables and why that's been traditional. So it is important, like you say, that somebody else shows up with what the law really is. And we're dealing with this in a number of situations where they try to intimidate, they try to come in and scare and end up really violating. There are federal laws on religious freedom in the military. There are policies under each branch of the military protecting religious freedom and the free exercise of religion. It goes back to George Washington, that he wanted our military to have religious freedom because they need to be able to rely upon their faith. And the idea of sort of wiping that out in the military would be a disaster for a quality military. In fact, one of the briefs filed in one of our cases was by, I think, 12 retired generals, and they said that they found that the number one reason that people actually go into the military is because of their faith.
Wow.
And so there's a myriad of reasons why it's important, but it goes all the way back to George Washington, and it's been here ever since. And thank goodness Mikey Weinstein is not getting the result he wants to get, which is to wipe religious freedom out of the military, because that would be so disastrous to our military, and it would be horrible for these people. I mean, can you imagine? They're already giving everything for their country, and the idea that then they can't rely upon their faith, they can't talk about their faith, they can't, and again, in Mikey Weinstein's word, there would be no chaplains. There would be none of that ministry or availability for people of faith. That would be really horrible. And so that's why we have, as one of our resources, what are your rights in the military? Because you do have lots of them, both federal law, in the branches, the DOD policies, everything does support you.
We did talk just a minute ago about some of the resource booklets that you have there on what are your rights in the business world, what are your rights in the education world. What about the military? Just I know there are some listeners this hour that are in the military, and they're wondering, if I go and talk to Michael Berry, am I actually subverting my command, or am I doing something that would be inappropriate in terms of military discipline?
No, absolutely not. I mean, number one, he's active reserve, so I mean, he just spent a week, with the military. But number two, no, it's all of these cases that we're doing. For instance, right now, like we're representing a chaplain in one case. I could go on and on, but in those cases, Mike actually and we represent those people in the military in their process. They have every right to have a lawyer, a civilian lawyer, whatever, but having Mike, which is somebody who both understands the Constitution and the military law, is an incredible plus. And they have every right to do that. They also have every right to call and it's confidential. It's an attorney-client privilege conversation, so they can call and just ask questions and just say, I'm in a situation, I don't know how to handle this. We've done that lots of times and with lots of great results. There have been people who have been threatened, and once Mike and our team have been able to give them information, and they go back to their superior and they say, look, I'm trying to make sure I understand this. Here's what I've been told the law is, etc. We've had a number of those people say, you know what, I was off on this. And in fact, one of them I'm thinking in particular, he said, I'd like you to come and teach this to all of our people.
Excellent.
So it's, you can not only correct your situation if somebody's really under misunderstanding, but you can actually impact many, many people that are going to follow in your footsteps and have them be blessed because they understand the freedoms that are there.
Outstanding. We need to take a break. When we come back, got a lot more to cover, don't we? And certainly, if you would like some more information on a couple of these stories that we've talked about, we have, of course, a couple on everything from Brett Kavanaugh to pastors. We come back a little bit later. I want to talk about this other judicial ruling that came from Dallas, Oregon. I happen to know where that is because last year I was actually teaching in a church in Dallas, Oregon. And this is where the judge actually said that parents who have objections about mixed-sex showers for their children, well, they have a solution. They can just take their kids out of school because, after all, they have no expectation of privacy. They have no fundamental privacy right not to share school restrooms, lockers, and showers with transgender students.
Wow.
There's a person we need to educate, right?
Yeah, it's good. Judges like that, I wish they would be forced to have their wives, their children, their grandchildren put in those situations. I just, I find that really unconscionable. It's really sad.
Well, again, I'd heard about that one, and so then when I realized I've actually been in that town, it's just a small, little, fairly conservative town on the way to the Oregon coast, and so that comes from a judge that was put there by the previous administration. Elections do have consequences, don't they?
Yes,
so
they
we'll
do.
talk about that. And when we come back, we'll get back into a little bit more of what we discussed. I mean, after all, this has been incredibly good economic news, unless your name is Mark Zuckerberg. That didn't turn out so well for him, but everybody else. And we got things ranging from shadow banning to, of course, the farmers and trade and just all sorts of topics that we want to address today. And if you've appreciated the conversation, and I can see from a number of comments on Facebook, you certainly do, we would greatly appreciate you leaving those comments. And again, if you would like to support this ministry, click on that button that says donate, and that's a way in which you can support the ministry. And if you yesterday appreciated the conversation we had with Jerry Tuma, we still are making available that Cornerstone report. It's free, and I think we're up to about 160 people that got the free report. And if you would like to and have not done so, it's still on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. Penna, Dexter, Kelly Shackelford, all that coming up right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is our weekend edition. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, and we're going to be talking about some very good economic news. Not so good for Mark Zuckerberg. He had a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week, but we'll get into that. We, of course, have the trade wars and some victories, perhaps, for farmers, so we'll certainly get into that issue. Story that we have here on non-citizens voting and some religious liberty issues as well. And is it true that social media is shadow banning? And if you don't know what that is, we'll explain that a little bit later. But that was one of the tweets by Donald Trump and some of the accusations out there as well. Penna, Dexter, we certainly have a lot to cover in the next couple hours.
Well, we do, and a lot of people have heard the good economic news about gross domestic product jumping 4.1%, and it was 2.2% last quarter in the second quarter of the year. So that's a big number, and there's a lot of factors involved. But it's interesting that also this week the EU leader and President Trump agreed to work towards zero tariffs. So it was an agreement,
yes,
and certainly there are a lot of U.S. manufacturers that have been feeling a little pain and chafing under these negotiations, so some of them are probably taking a second look now.
Well, again, Kelly, one of the arguments is made as well. The reason it's at 4.1 is because maybe some of the individuals, like farmers, had let's get the exports in before the tariffs start. But I think if you look long term, we have seen a lot of things: the tax cuts, changes in regulation, a much more pro-business environment, and the longest growth in the stock market, one of the longest in the history of the world and history of the United States. So, yeah, you can write it off as well. That's just a number of people trying to get in some soybean exports before the tariffs cut in. But I think there's some other explanations, don't you think?
No, yeah, I think that's not valid at all. I mean, this is, and again, I forget I wish I remember. I don't know if it's Treasury Secretary. It wasn't Secretary. I don't think it was Mnuchin, but it was somebody today I was listening to said something. I thought, I think that's right. They said we haven't had a sort of a boom, a real prosperity boom since the 1990s, and the prediction was that this is the beginning of that, and I think I agree with that. I mean, if you remember, under Obama, it was 1 point GDP, right, forever. I mean, this is not for a while. It was like for 8 years. It was just, it's because that philosophy, that sort of government, regulation philosophy is like putting your foot on the neck of small business, medium-sized business, big business, everybody. And so what did Trump come in to do? The first thing he did is for every new regulation added, 22 have been eradicated. Wow. Talk about freedom.
He said it would be 2.
Yeah.
For everyone, it's 22 to 1.
And so we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing the results of the tax cuts. All that money that was camped outside the United States because of taxes, that now the repatriation of that money coming back in, that now is being invested in our economy and our people. I think this is just the beginning, and I think we're going to see a boom. And the thing I thought was fascinating about what was said was, and I thought, I've never thought of that. He said, millennials have never seen this type of, boom, this type of real prosperity boom. And therefore I think this is part of why there's that confusion in the millennials about socialism, because they don't understand. They've never even really seen what happens when you sort of take the government foot off the neck of business and let them go and let them to start, competing. I mean, the free market brings out the best ideas. The way I think the best way, I think I heard Tony Evans say this once, but those who serve the best are those who win. And so it's an economy that really ends up bringing better productivity, better products, better results, better freedom. And it's a better way to go. And we're now seeing the results of that. Again, a lot of people there were all these predictions about how Trump didn't know what he was doing when he came in. He was going to ruin the economy. I think there was a prediction of recession by 4 or 5 different leaders. And I think they missed it.
Yeah. And the previous president said, what magic wand does he have to bring this about? Well, I think we found out what the magic wand is. It's calling reduce taxes, reduce regulations, stimulate the economy, repatriate money that had been overseas. And now you have 4.1%. I didn't think that would happen, and I've been a lot more optimistic than a lot of people.
And Trump said today that, this would continue, and it's really it's not wishful thinking to think that, because as Kelly just ticked off all the different things that have changed. So, I think that's why this is a good lesson for millennials, because they haven't seen it, because these things actually do work, and capitalism is actually a system that works. Socialism, the one they've seen, is the system that comes in when you've abused capitalism, when you've abused the economy, and when you've tried to bail people out in all different sectors of the economy. That's socialism. And so that generation has seen that. They've seen, first of all, they've seen it not work well, but they've seen it as the only answer in some senses, because especially in the 8 years of President Obama. And those years where even the reforms that we had to welfare were gutted.
I think this, and it's not Democrat, Republican, okay? That's not what we're talking about here. Obama's whole approach was obviously more government, more regulation, all that. It doesn't work. But if you'll remember, I remember us sitting here at the table when George Bush was president, and when we had the crash at the stock market.
Oh, there you go.
He stepped in and he said, I'll never forget this quote, I have violated free market principles to save the free market economy. And, my head exploded. I was like, no. And that's when the government came in and did all this stuff and took over everything. And so that's what millennials have seen growing up is that's not what we're seeing now. So what we see now reminds me really of back with Ronald Reagan, when everything was flipped, when taxes were brought down, and all of a sudden the economy just started totally turning the opposite direction. They still spent all the extra money that was coming in, but the money that was coming into the coffers came in, and even though the taxes were lower, and this is what it reminds me of: less regulations, giving people more money in their pocket, bringing the money back from overseas into the United States, and we're seeing, I think, what is going to be the begin. We're used to 1 GDPs all over and over and over. I think we're going to start seeing 4s and maybe even 5s, which is really unheard of.
Well, and again, this is going to relate to the commentary that Penna Dexter has up today in just a few minutes, because think about this. When you have about 1% growth in the population and you have about 1% growth in the economy, that fits pretty well. Imagine if this sustains, but let's just assume 3%, because it was 2% last time, 4% here. Maybe it drops down again. But if the economy is growing at 3% and you're only having the population grow at 1%, you have the situation you have right now, which we'll talk about after the break, and that is record unemployment lowered, not up, increased. And so you just have a situation where you actually have more jobs than you have people to fill them, which gets back to not only the issue of the birth rate, but immigration and a variety of other things.
So these millennials need to start having kids.
Yeah, and the impact of abortion and Social Security and all those issues.
What if you changed a couple more justices and maybe there stopped being as many abortions because it was state to state? Maybe you'd start having more people that could actually fill these jobs, these future citizens.
There are a lot of things that are connected to this issue, but nothing else. 4.1%. And we'll talk about Mark Zuckerberg. Lost $119 billion in one day.
Ouch.
Whew. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Media critics have for years decried the proliferation of fake news and have been especially critical when quotes and comments were ripped out of context. J.J. McCullough recently wrote about another related issue that isn't given enough coverage. A liberal press often runs photos that are obviously ripped out of context. Now, since he is a Canadian, McCullough begins his piece by talking about a deceptive photo of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Donald Trump. They're seated in those two famous chairs in the Oval Office. Trump is extending his hand for a handshake, and Trudeau is merely looking at his hand. The photo went viral because it showed Trudeau's dislike of Trump and his unwillingness to shake the president's hand. But that's not what happened. The damning photo was surgically extracted from a split second in which Trump's hand extended just before Trudeau's rose to meet it. Of course, that's not what the photo showed. Which brings us to the worst editorial photograph of the year. John Moore accompanied the U.S. Border Patrol to the bank of the Rio Grande to get a photograph of what he believed would convey the emotional impact of family separation. He took a picture of a toddler crying as her mother from Honduras was patted down by border agents. The picture went viral because it showed the pain of separating children from their parents at the border. There's just one problem. The mother and daughter were not separated. They were detained since she is seeking asylum. The photo not only went viral, but Time magazine put the same image of the child on the cover with President Donald Trump under the caption, "Welcome to America." We're told that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Unfortunately, we're also seeing that a photo ripped out of context can be as erroneous as fake news. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, we've just begun. There's so many things to talk about today, but one of those, of course, was the economic explosion that we are seeing, and that is GDP at 4.1%, and that is pretty impressive. And I mentioned something in passing, so it's just a good time to focus on Penna Dexter's commentary. If you go to the website right now, you will see that we have posted her commentary, Middle Child Extinction, and she'll explain that in just a minute. But as we do that, let me just mention that if you would like to receive our commentaries, my Viewpoints commentary would appear in your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna's will appear to your inbox on Saturday. It's free. But, Penna, let's talk about that for just a minute. If the economy is growing at 3 or 4%, our population's only growing at 1%, we have sort of a demographic winter anyway, and this shows this real dislocation between the number of jobs being potentially created and the inability of employers to actually fill those jobs.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to see, a problem there, an inability to find good people to do the work. You're going to see one thing which we've hope for is rising wages. You will see that
for sure.
But we have a problem now, and that's one reason why a lot of companies support immigration, and they just need people to come in and do the work because we are not producing enough babies, basically. And for a lot of reasons, Kelly mentioned the abortion issue, but it's also the issue of people just not having as many children. And that's right. So I saw this article, and it caught my emotion at first. It was in the New York Magazine about middle child extinction, and I thought about my middle child, Andrew, and yours, Jonathan, yours, Catherine Ann. these are great people, and these kinds of kids they made the case about the qualities that middle children have. So that was a lot of this article was about that. But there's another side to that also, and that's the side that our millennial kids, for various reasons, are not having enough children. And they're doing it mainly for financial reasons. So when we look at the good economy now and how things are getting better, it makes me a little bit more hopeful that perhaps that will encourage some of these people in their late 20s, early 30s, and now getting even into the later 30s to start thinking about maybe having that second or third child when they weren't going to do it because they were so worried about money, or they're paying off their student loans or whatever. The injection of a good economy and growth into that factor, we look at it from the other side, that we just need more people to fuel the Social Security welfare system. Mm-hmm. But it's the other way around in one sense, too. If we have a better economy, we may start having a better birth rate.
That would be great. And again, it's interesting how, God's in control of the leaders of all the countries, of all the nations, the sovereignty. He's put a leader here who's resulting in some pretty dramatic economic results. I wonder, is he reshaping the court at the same time so that the whole stranglehold where the Supreme Court had control of the issue of abortion, which is really a power grab because it's not in the Constitution. Is that going to be returned to the states? And when it is, are there going to be less abortions as a result of that? I think that's very possible, right? And so then these think of all the millions of citizens we would have available right now for these jobs. Right now, there's not enough people for the jobs, and we're having to immigrate, lots of people. But think of if we had our own, children, our own, offspring that were able to fill these jobs, what a difference that would make in the future of our country.
And I might just add one more thing, and we'll take a phone call along the way. And that is, I wrote about a week ago about the robotics revolution. And I do want to have Jay Richards on because he's written a book on that subject. And again, anytime you have a new technological revolution, there's some dislocation. Look at the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. Look, even as we move from a agricultural society to industrial society to a service society. And again, what I think is going to really fuel this, and it's not necessarily all good, is that when you start saying, I don't have enough jobs, people to fill the jobs that need to be done, I'm going to replace individuals with robots. And even now, as you go into some of these fast food places, you actually order on the machines and things like that. And today I was driving some people to a place, and one of them in the car, interestingly enough, her job right now is she's training the robot to essentially replace her. And so that's another issue to be thinking about, what that is. And that, I think, is another warning to you as parents and grandparents. Teach your children and grandchildren. Make sure they train themselves and educate themselves for a job that a robot won't replace. Because we right now...
It's hard to know what that is.
Yeah, but, first of all, there's certain things. I don't think a robot's ever going to cut our hair. Of course, some people look at my hair and think that's what it's done. But nevertheless, there is a robot that will actually mow your lawn. I saw one the other day just going around there mowing the lawn and things like that. So just kind of think through what that's going to be, because we're in the midst of a new kind of technological revolution. But I have another suggestion here, so let's go to the state of Maine. And Bob, I think you have a suggestion as we talk about some of these job issues, and then we're going to get into some other topics.
Yes, I do. Thank you. President Trump's executive order forming a National Workforce Commission, or whatever it's called, I think would benefit from having a clearinghouse associated with that order, where people could call and access the jobs that are being offered as far as apprenticeship or training for skilled jobs that are going wanting because of the lack of people that are trained to fill these jobs. And that perhaps there would be an 800 number or a website that nationally and regionally that people could contact.
Well, again, one of the things we've talked about, Penna, is we're not real big on workforce development, where we train people for jobs, because the government cannot even have a clue as to what the jobs are going to be in the 21st century. So let's get government out there. But I do like the idea of a clearinghouse. You know, there are individuals probably all over the country right now that say, I've got a job, but I need specific kinds of skills. And that's why I think the internet has been a real benefit to connect up people with certain skills with other places where those skills can be actually utilized. So that is a possibility. I still think the private sector can do that pretty well, but if the government can help out, I'm all for it.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps that is a role for government to actually have the information, where some needs are. But, yeah, I get really concerned about government control of the workforce. That has a lot of sort of totalitarian
We've talked about
tones
that,
to it.
haven't we? Yes.
And, we need people. We still need our education system to educate the whole person and give you, I get a little concerned about, education to send you into the workforce to the specific job. I think your education needs to be more well-rounded than that. And schools, are right now, because of our economy, I think have been paying a lot of attention to, being able to produce someone and guarantee that they could go in and earn this amount of money. And that's been sort of a pressure on universities and high schools. But I do think we need to maintain the focus of getting a more well-rounded education, sort of a liberal arts component to everybody's education that I think has been going away.
I've said sometimes when I'm speaking to an audience, how many of you are in a job that is different than the one you were prepared for in college? And all the hands go up just about, except for the doctors, the engineers, maybe the lawyers, a few others. I mean, everybody else recognizes that. And then this changing economy, I think being well-rounded, but also having some good technological skills, just knowing how to program a computer is going to help you, because if nothing else, the robots can't program them themselves. And you think about all the other options and availability. And that gets back to the issue of immigration. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that because we have so many other things to cover, but we should be asking fundamental questions, even as people are at the border wanting to come here. We know what our needs are. Just letting people in willy-nilly who cross our border or overstay their visas, that's not helpful to our country. We have some really significant needs. And if you've ever looked at the want ads, you see lots and lots of lines of it, but they're for people that have background in biotechnology or they have background in computer programming and those kinds of things. And those aren't necessarily all the kind of people that cross our borders.
We should be able to choose the type of immigrant we bring into the country, but that goes back to knowing who's coming into the country.
Yes. Well, when we come back from the break, just for a minute, I want to talk about this whole trade war. We had a conversation about it on Wednesday, and I'd have to say that Nick Pitts was pretty concerned about it. Maybe Chelsea was as well. But we, since then, have had the European Commission come up with some different answers. So this is a little bit of a high-stakes game, so I'd like to get some thoughts about that, and then we'll move into this very terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week of Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, and also the president talking about shadow banning, what that means. And it reminds me of conversation, Kelly, we had with somebody you brought in studio a couple of weeks ago. So we have a lot to cover, and we will do that right after these messages. Go to the website right now, and you can find some of the articles we've posted. Let me just mention, yesterday we also had Jerry Tuma in studio, and we are still making available that free report, Cornerstone Report, that is available to you and help you make some wise decisions about your own finances. So that's still available as well at the website, pointofview.net. Stay tuned. We have a lot more to cover. We will do that right after this.
In an age of fake news, getting good information is vital. Point of View works to bring you that each and every day. But as Diane in Arkansas illustrates, passing that information along, educating others, is something you can help with. Diane is a college professor. She influences the next generation, and she wrote, "Thank you for your informative letter. I used some of your quotes when I was teaching the Declaration of Independence in my literature class." Diane, like so many, hopefully like you, is taking what she received from Point of View in letters, online, through our app, on the air, and rebuilding truth in this post-truth culture. All of that takes a team. Join the Truth Team at Point of View. Find out how you can help at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. Show your commitment. Make a difference today, right now. Pointofview.net/team. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. It is our weekend edition, and we've been talking about the whole issue of economics. We'll get back to that in just a minute, and might even mention again that we're still making available that Cornerstone report. But before we go too much further, I would certainly want to make this a matter of prayer. Kelly, you're going to Washington, D.C. on Monday, as I understand, and I'd like our listeners to know what you're doing, and most importantly, pray about it.
Yeah, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, Sessions, Rod Rosenstein. I mean, you go on down the list. All the top people are having a meeting that we've been invited to. And Hiram Sasser, our general counsel, will be with me, but on religious freedom.
Yes.
And so, in fact, it's going to be live streamed, so people can actually will be able to watch it. The media is going to be there. But I think it's significant I can't remember the last time, I can't remember this ever happening where all the top people at the Justice Department were having this type of deal where they're all coming together at one time to promote, talk about, and then later on, this won't be on camera though, have a time where we're, they're wanting our ideas on where are their problems, et cetera, because they want to make sure that religious freedom is protected. And so that's going to be a neat opportunity on Monday in Washington, D.C. So I encourage people to pray and watch it. And they can, if they're not, I'm sure we'll let people know what's happening, if they're on our, list at First Liberty. But, I think you can go just directly to the DOJ and live stream it and watch it there as well.
It's so good because we have a society right now in which sexual freedom has trumped religious freedom, Trump being a verb in this case. Mm-hmm. And in so many things that happened in our society over the last decade or more, that's happened. Then, of course, had the Obergefell decision, and it changes so many things. And so threats to religious liberty have arisen because of government action in many cases. And so it's good that the government now is paying attention to that. How can we go back and protect the liberty of, you think about employers across the country. You think about religious, the adoption agencies have lost the freedom to place people, if they're based on a church or denomination or whatever, they can't, in some instances, follow their tenets of their religion in placing children. So there's just so many issues like that for the government to kind of get a policy on that and to begin to address that, I think is a very positive development. Absolutely. And again, I think it's, I can't remember this being done before. So it's, I think, a really good sign, and it's something that people can pay attention to. I'm sure there's going to be lots of news on it that everybody will see Monday night and Tuesday morning. But it's all happening on Monday morning through lunchtime. There'll be a lot of attacks from the left about it, too.
Oh, you know that. Let me just mention, too, that when you go to our website today, we've got a number of articles. We may get to those a little bit later in the program, but while we're talking about religious liberty, we've got one by Hiram Sasser about Brett Kavanaugh and religious liberty. We have one by Mike Berry on First Amendment and pastors. We have one that Todd Starnes did on this Air Force Base and having to do with POW, MIAs. So there are just a lot of articles we've posted today. We'll probably get to those in just a minute. But I thought for a second, Penna, let me come to you because there has been a whole lot of question as to whether or not these trade wars are going to be good and whether or not the trade wars might even begin to affect the midterm elections. I still say there's a long way from July to November, but nevertheless, there has been a high-stakes kind of game being played by the president saying, okay, if you're going to have tariffs, we're going to have tariffs. And so immediately Europe comes back with duties on everything from blue jeans to Kentucky bourbon to Harley-Davidson motorcycles, orange juice, rice, and corn. But the announcement from the European Union tells me that maybe he's actually winning this high-stakes game.
Trump is saying his hardball tactics are actually working. And, of course, they did have this agreement between President Trump and the European Commission chief, Jean-Claude Juncker. I don't know how you say his last name. But it basically, it's moving toward, they hope, sort of a zero-tariff situation. And there's sort of like a, I don't know, they're not going to impose any tariffs on autos right now. They're going to stop that during these negotiations. Even Trump had threatened that. Rolling back duties on steel and aluminum with Europe. And also Europe will then supposedly be buying our soybeans and also our natural gas. And so that they made these negotiations. They spent a lot of time together. And I think it's interesting to look at this president. He does it himself. He goes in there and does the negotiations himself. He goes face to face, toe to toe with the leader of whatever country, this happening to be the European Union's commission chief, and that's one of his skills.
I've never seen a president do it like that.
I have never seen it either.
Never seen anything like that.
And so they came out with this announcement. And, of course, these things go step by step. And you don't know exactly how they're going to turn out. But the Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, said, he floated the question, did this happen because Trump started with steel and aluminum tariffs? And, he actually laid that on the table. He took a lot of flack for it from members of Congress and businesses across the nation. But because he did that, is he going to now be able to bring Europe together with us to stand up against China? Because that's been, everybody agrees that China cheats and that we need to change our situation with regard to trade with China. So, now there's question in people's minds. Are these tariffs all bad, or was this a good opening shot across the bow to begin to make things better for the United States? And one thing that did happen in the report today that was not that we haven't talked about is that the trade deficit, which Trump, he wants to lower the trade deficit. He thinks those are bad. It did drop by $52 billion.
Yeah, I think this is what a lot of what Trump's been doing. It's why I know we talked about last week when all the criticism because he didn't essentially slap Putin in public. I mean, he's negotiating. And I think he's proven that it's working. Look at what happened with NATO, $30 or $40 billion already increase in NATO. And now this, I mean, the European Union was just tariffing us to death. And so the people, look, I understand how people, might go, well, I don't like the fact that there's tariffs right now. The whole point is tariffs are bad. But if you unilaterally disarm, then all you do is get bad tariffs against you. And so what he's doing is he's saying, look, let's get rid of all these tariffs. And to show you that they're not good, I'm going to put what you're doing to us, we're going to do to you. And it's working. I mean, one by one, everybody is we're getting renegotiated deals where the tariffs are coming down and there's more ability to have a true free market, and America is benefiting from this across the board.
One of the things that we learned even yesterday when we were talking a little bit with Jerry Tuma is from time to time when we talk about how tariffs are bad, we always talk about Smoot-Hawley. But he's got a graph here, and again, you can get the report where he shows how extensive the Smoot-Hawley tariffs were and how few we have here. So when we talk about these tariffs, sometimes, again, I know this will surprise you. Sometimes the people in the media that don't like Donald Trump make it sound a lot worse than it really is. And it's not as bad as it was. It's just enough to kind of be a pinprick on major companies or major states to get their attention. But in some cases, he's kind of the deal maker. And so far, in a number of cases, whether it's South Korea or now the European Union, it seems to be working. The big question, I think, is it going to work with China? Because China could probably outlast us for a long period of time, don't you think?
They probably could. And that's why we need to have sort of a united front with some other countries. And so, having a deal with Europe now and perhaps growing solidarity with the European nations could help with regard to China. But, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done, and we have to make them feel some pain, I think, along the way.
If you look at some of the ads, and I'll just pick two states that I'm aware of because I've been looking at what those ads are in Tennessee and in Missouri, the Democrats are using this against the Republicans in both cases. Marsha Blackburn, for example, there in Tennessee. And so it'll be interesting because I'll use Tennessee since I got a guy from Nashville here. The soybean growers are saying, hey, we're getting really hurt here. So that's why, again, just the other day, Sonny Perdue said we're going to provide some financial relief, which has caused people to say, what are we, the Soviet Union? But again, there's going to be some short-term pain, but there can be long-term gain. But we'll see where it plays out in the elections.
People aren't that short-sighted. I mean, again, sometimes some of that stuff works in these elections. But the whole point of what Trump is doing is anti-tariff.
Yes.
He's using tariffs to bring down the tariffs against you. So if you're an American business you need to have enough long-term view to realize this is going to bless you long-term. It's just going to be a very short-term battle.
Yeah. Well, what we've been doing hasn't been working, is the old Dr. Phil question. How's that working for you? Hasn't worked so well, so he's trying something different. We'll be right back.
If you are a middle child or a parent of one or more middles, you are becoming increasingly rare. Every child born after the first and before the last is technically a middle. In an article in New York Magazine, culture editor Adam Sternberg makes the startling revelation that the American middle child is now an endangered species. He explains the demographics. As the ideal number of children per family has shrunk to 2, the middle child, in a very real sense, is disappearing. He cites a Pew Research Center study done in 1976, which found that the average mother at the end of her childbearing years had given birth to 3 or more children. Today, nearly 2/3 of women with children have 2 or 1. This is the norm across the nation and for every demographic group. Millennials are marrying later. Women are waiting longer to have children. But Adam Sternberg explains that this really boils down to what couples think they can afford. 3 kids, which a generation ago was considered a slightly smaller brood than ideal, now seems aspirational, even decadent. Most of Mr. Sternberg's article laments what we as a culture will lose as the cohort of middle children dwindles. They are natural mediators. They often have to work harder to be noticed and are more likely to take risks than the oldest or the youngest. One term that is almost never applied to middle children is spoiled. The writer wonders, do we really want a world with fewer diplomats or fewer hardy types whose upbringing gives them a knack for empathy? Birth order expert and popular author Kevin Lehman says that this evaporation of middle children is a loss for all of us. Middle children, he says, are like the peanut butter and jelly in the sandwich. If you like a sandwich with nothing on it, enjoy. Really good things often require a leap of faith. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let's focus a little bit of time and attention on social media, and that is our third article here. And it has to do, well, actually, fourth article. Third article has to do with Facebook losing $119 billion, but that's another social media story. But the fourth article has to do with social media shadow banning. Now, this is something that, let me just read the Twitter post by Donald Trump. Twitter is shadow banning prominent Republicans. Not good. We will look into this discriminatory and illegal practice at once. Many complaints. Now, shadow banning is the idea where it looks like when you post something on Twitter and it shows up on your feed that everybody sees it, but the only person that sees it is you. And over the years, I've jokingly said that, when I post one of my commentaries on Facebook, I get all sorts of comments. When I post it on Twitter, hardly any. And I've wondered about that as well, but maybe that nobody follows me on Twitter. But that's another story. But this is something that's been pretty well documented. And Kelly, I want to go back to one of the guests that you brought in studio a number of months ago, and we can point people to it if they'd like to know more about it. Because Brian was actually here, and he had actually done some work with, I think it was Rush Limbaugh, and began to notice some of the algorithms and ways in which there was a bias against conservatives. Speak to that, if you might.
Yeah, and what he was advocating, I mean, what we could go in a lot of different ways. Facebook, for instance, uses algorithms. It used to be that on Facebook, it would connect you to the things that you had common interest. And the idea was to just be friendly, right?
Yeah, right.
And this was all a setup to when they changed the algorithms. And I think people noticed in the last, 6 months or so, all of a sudden everything began to change. And where they would instead now what happens is if there's something that you might want to see because it's something that's your interest, now they intentionally block that so that they have to pay advertising to get that information to you. Mm-hmm. So this is kind of how it's working. And so there's all these things that they're building in, mostly for their own financial advantage. But all of a sudden, Facebook is not just a friendly place where you share information. Now it's very much manipulated to a greater extent than ever before. The problem is a lot of the algorithms, a lot of things they're doing, and they also have these censors, these 2,200 whatever people who are reviewing to make sure that, something really bad, gets off. And of course that gets defined differently by different people. And these people tend to be skewed more liberal. And so we're finding that things are getting banned like Diamond and Silk, and, a Christian church's Easter ads and just on and on and on. And there's all these stories beginning to happen. And Brian was on to talk about how all this stuff worked and how Google works and how they have a profile on you that's just down to the T. It's just scary how much information they have. And one of the things he was saying, because there's this argument now that this is getting very dangerous. And this is like a common carrier. I mean, this is, if you don't use, Facebook or Google, I think that's 80% of the digital advertising. So they really have somewhat akin to a monopoly.
They do.
And then if they start manipulating and discriminating against and all this, it gets very frightening. And so what a lot of people there's two things people are advocating. Either number one, that the government come in, as President Trump was referencing in his tweet, that the government come in and treat them like either a monopoly or a common carrier, and therefore they have to actually go by certain standards. Now, there are some people, even on the conservative side, that say, well, we don't want the government involved. And so the other option is for these companies to realize for their own, well-being, they better come up with a consumer bill of rights where things are known and open. That, hey, wait a second, you're not blocking people from getting to me unless you tell me. That I have to know what you're doing. And most consumers, and that's what we insist upon usually, is we have a right to know what you're doing with me, or else I'm not doing business with you. Facebook is, of course, finding out that, this is what the consumers will eventually demand, which is why they took a $119 billion hit. I mean, this stuff eventually catches up with you. But those are really either nothing happens and these groups control everything, which I don't think is acceptable, or the government's going to step in, or they're going to come up with some sort of consumer bill of rights where everything is open and people know what's going on.
We've had Craig Parshall on here when he was with the National Religious Broadcasters putting together the Milton Project. We're worrying about that. More recently, we've also talked with Frank Wright at D. James Kennedy. We've also not only wanted to speak out to this issue, but actually even brought a lawsuit against Southern Poverty Law Center, because sometimes that's used to determine whether or not you're a hate group or not. So, Penna, this is something that I think our listeners need to pay attention to if they're using social media.
They do need to pay attention to it. And I do look at the stories today, the Facebook huge drop in stock.
Yes.
And also this idea that, there's sort of some nannying going on of from the big tech companies like Twitter, Facebook, and others who are managing content. And so the degree to which they do that, and sometimes, when you go in and complain, they try to blame their algorithms. They've set things up to try to make it. Jack Dorsey at Twitter used the word health of our conversations, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, who gets to determine what a healthy conversation is on Twitter? And so, I do have some sense of hopefulness that these people are smart enough to see that for their own good, they need to make some changes. And, I've seen some notes coming out of Twitter from a friend of mine that works there where, they say they're trying.
Yeah.
But you have to, the proof is in what really happens. When you start to see these instances of people feeling like, oh, well, the Democrats aren't being shadow banned, but the Republican leaders are. Mm-hmm. So, there are still problems. There are big problems there. And, I would hope, because I'm a free market person, I hope the government doesn't have to come in and start to treat these companies like utilities.
And again, I would just simply say that it is a private company. So in one sense, I can let them do what they want, but I also wish there was more disclosure and saying, well, we're going to just be kind of a liberal social media, and you know what you're going to get into. But they, on the one hand, pretend that, no, we're just a public utility. We're just a forum, and anybody has a chance to express their point of view. But then we find out that they're a lot more like an editorial page of a newspaper when it comes down to it. So, first of all, I think the government does have to say, what are you? Are you a public utility, or are you a editorial forum? There's all the difference in the world in terms of that. And then, of course, the other issue is that I think we as consumers can actually exercise some values. And I've run into a number of people that said, you know what? I'm giving up on Facebook, and that drop of $119 billion, that came for a whole lot of reasons. But one of them is just a lot of people are saying, I think I've just given up on the social media forum right now.
Yeah, that's probably one of the big reasons.
This is really in play right now. Twitter, Facebook, Google. I mean, all these groups. We're in the midst of something being figured out here, and so I think people need to start insisting upon more transparency, that they don't skew things, that people know what they're doing and why they're doing it, because I think consumers have a right to know that. And I think most consumers were assuming that everything was just fine, that they were getting to see everything, and then all of a sudden things started getting blocked and manipulated, and so it's I think it's up to the consumers to demand the right approach, and I think we're moving in that direction.
So the news media blames the Facebook drop on privacy concerns, but I just wonder how much. We all know that we're putting our privacy at risk to some degree using social media. So I just wonder if it's really as much that factor as the media is saying.
Let's take a break, and I'd love to get some of your comments. Are you staying on social media? Are you getting off of it? Are you concerned about this? That's one issue. And in the next hour, we're going to get back into some of the religious liberty issues. All that coming up right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week. in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. If you're just joining us, you've missed quite a bit, and I might encourage you maybe to go back and, if nothing else, read some of the articles we've posted. Of course, we've talked about some of the economic development and what is happening in the economy. We just a few minutes ago spent some time talking about social media. We've talked about the trade wars, and I do want to get into some of these legal issues because Kelly Shackelford is with us. We'll get into religious liberty in just a minute, but one that I want to focus on is a judge that now looks like he will force high schoolers to share showers with people of the opposite sex. You can't make this up, but here we go once again. And we have an issue of non-citizens voting. We talked about that about a week ago, but now we have a story that relates to it. And, of course, we'll get into some of those religious liberty issues. So at any point, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, this story is kind of closer to home. Last year, I had a chance to actually speak in a church in Dallas, Oregon. It is a very small community.
I didn't know there was a Dallas, Oregon.
Dallas, Texas, Dallas, Oregon. And Dallas, Oregon is really a small little town, very sweet individuals there, pretty much of a farm town. And it's a town that you would go through on your way to the Oregon beach. But nevertheless, this U.S. District Court judge argues that if you are transgender, you have a right, and in this case, it's a boy who thinks he's a girl, can go into the girl's shower. And he says the alternative is parents who object to mixed-sex showers for their children can take them out of the schools for which they pay. Here's a couple of comments. It is within the parents' plaintiff's right to remove their children from the Dallas, Oregon high school if they disapprove of transgender student access to facilities. And the one that just really got me, that students have no fundamental privacy right not to share school restrooms, lockers, and showers with transgender students. We've been hearing for decades about so-called privacy rights, and now he says, but you don't have a privacy right if you're a girl and you're offended by a boy who thinks he's a girl in the showers. Well, that's your problem, and you can leave school. Something's got to be done.
Yeah, here's the quote. Did you read the quote? Once the parents have chosen to send their children to school, their liberty interest in their children's education is severely diminished. Wow. Well, that's kind of an argument for homeschooling, isn't it?
Yeah. Kelly, this has got to make your head explode.
Yeah.
This has got to.
This is why who's president and what kind of judges are appointed is important. This was a judge appointed by President Obama, who obviously doesn't believe in the fundamental rights of parents over their children, which is a basic constitutional right that goes back to the 1920s. The quote is, there's a fundamental right of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children. And the idea that, the hypocrisy of these people, I can't imagine any of these people would be okay with their wives, with their daughters, with their grandchildren, having to shower with people of the opposite sex. It's just like the brain has just slipped out of their skull. I think most people listen to Point of View are like, duh, that's the kind of thing you go and punch somebody for. And this guy's writing opinions saying you have no right not to participate in that. This is one of the reasons why Donald Trump was elected.
I'm thinking that. Yes.
Political correctness had gotten so extreme that everybody was sitting around thinking, that's crazy, but everybody was scared to say anything because everything had gotten so crazy. I think this is the kind of thing that people said, no more. Okay, this is beyond the pale. I'm not going to stand for this for my kids, for my grandkids. This is not going to happen to my wife. This is not going to happen. And if Donald Trump needs to punch you in the face, then so be it. I mean, that's kind of the election and why it went on is these types of things. But I think this transcends Trump. It's just that spirit. I don't care if you're a liberal or conservative. Most people look at this and go, this is ridiculous.
You may hear more about this when you go to the Department of Justice next week, Kelly, because
I know.
There was a guidance that came out of the Obama administration that, I mean, we talked about this on Point of View at length, and then it talked about gender identity and taking Title IX and the definition of sex and expanding it to gender identity, which was causing a lot of these problems in schools across the country with privacy. Well, that has been rescinded now by the Justice Department and by the Department of Education. Those have been rescinded. But this judge in Oregon obviously didn't know that because that's the way he ruled. And, to say that, okay, your liberty interest in your children's education is severely diminished when you send your kids to public school. I mean, that needs to be challenged right there. But also the idea that the comfort of the transgender boy in this particular situation in Dallas, Oregon, is more important than the stress that all the boys in the locker room felt when a biological girl's in there. But the transgender boy gets more rights than they do. That's another area of
this all
contention.
goes back to judges and what kind of judges they are and whether they think they're a judge or a legislator.
Yeah.
Okay.
Changing Title IX.
Exactly.
Yeah. Redefining words.
How is this happening? Is there anything in the law about this transgender situation? No. The law says you don't discriminate against people because of their sex, which specifically meant when they passed the law, male or female.
Biological.
Yes. Not all of a sudden now this judge is going to read new things. He's going to reinterpret that word, redefine that word. That is not the job of the judge. What the judge should say is, okay, obviously the judge is very sympathetic to the transgender boy. Say, you know what? I don't like this, but here's what the law says, and the legislature should fix this. But that's not my job because I'm a judge, not a legislator. That's not what he did. He tried to become a legislator, and although he's not elected and therefore, subject to the people, and he's on the court for the rest of his life, that's why it's very dangerous that these kind of judges go on the court, and why it's so important that good judges be picked that don't think they're legislators, that think they have to restrain themselves, even if they don't agree with the policy choices of the people through their legislature. They simply say, that's not my job. My job is to apply this law. This law is very clear. It's talking about male versus female.
Well, it certainly is. Again, back in 1972, a law passed when Richard Nixon was president. We all know what the words meant back then, what sex meant back then. And it really means the same thing now, except some people are trying to redefine it and saying that gender is a person's subjective, deep core sense of self as being a particular gender. So if you're fighting one of these battles right now, again, let me just mention that one of the articles we've posted on the website, it's entitled Judge Forces High Schoolers to Share Showers with Opposite Sex by Bob Unruh, and I just think it's very well written because it helps you understand how insane this particular judgment is. It's obviously... I should say, maybe shouldn't say obviously, it's or state of Oregon, go to Ninth Circuit Court. Somewhere along the line, it's going to be struck down, right? And it's going to be something that will be overturned.
If the court takes it.
But we will see. And just illustrates again that sometimes people say, you're just overreacting. Well, that's why we wanted you to see this one. And these poor people, I've been to Dallas, Oregon. Yeah. I've spoken in a church right there by the high school, and I just can't even imagine what they're going through right now because this district judge says, well, sex means gender, and gender means they're protected, and we don't want to have a transgender boy who now thinks he's a girl feel discriminated against, so he, now she, quote, gets to go into the woman's restroom and showers. That's crazy. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Media critics have for years decried the proliferation of fake news and have been especially critical when quotes and comments were ripped out of context. J.J. McCullough recently wrote about another related issue that isn't given enough coverage. A liberal press often runs photos that are obviously ripped out of context. Now, since he is a Canadian, McCullough begins his piece by talking about a deceptive photo of Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and President Donald Trump. They're seated in those two famous chairs in the Oval Office. Trump is extending his hand for a handshake, and Trudeau is merely looking at his hand. The photo went viral because it showed Trudeau's dislike of Trump and his unwillingness to shake the president's hand. But that's not what happened. The damning photo was surgically extracted from a split second in which Trump's hand extended just before Trudeau's rose to meet it. Of course, that's not what the photo showed. Which brings us to the worst editorial photograph of the year. John Moore accompanied the U.S. Border Patrol to the bank of the Rio Grande to get a photograph of what he believed would convey the emotional impact of family separation. He took a picture of a toddler crying as her mother from Honduras was patted down by border agents. The picture went viral because it showed the pain of separating children from their parents at the border. There's just one problem. The mother and daughter were not separated. They were detained since she is seeking asylum. The photo not only went viral, but Time magazine put the same image of the child on the cover with President Donald Trump under the caption, "Welcome to America." We're told that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Unfortunately, we're also seeing that a photo ripped out of context can be as erroneous as fake news. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford, one of the other articles we posted, and there are a lot here today because there's just a lot going on. You know, you would think that the only thing has to do with Stormy Daniels or maybe some of the investigation right now by Bob Mueller, and there's, quite a bit there, but we're just trying to focus on all sorts of other issues, and one of those, Penna, is an article you suggested. It was in the Washington Times about non-citizens voting. Now, a while back, I did talk about the fact that you have now in San Francisco the ruling that if you are a non-citizen, you can at least vote in a school board election, school council elections, things like that, if you have a child under the age of 19. But this particular article is recognizing this is getting out of hand, and so the argument is, can we at least punish these jurisdictions that are now allowing people that are not citizens to go and vote?
Because it affects more than just them. It affects all the taxpayers in that area. So, this starts out, forget the Russian government. Foreign nationals are increasingly gaining the ability to influence American elections more directly. And you mentioned that in San Francisco, where they already passed the idea that if you're a non-citizen, you could vote in school board elections if you had a child in the schools. Okay. Well, Boston, they're debating the same type of law. And now Republicans in Congress are looking at this and saying that this is, we've got to fight back on this. So there's a representative, Jeff Duncan of South Carolina. He's introducing a bill that would strip federal funding from those states and localities that allow this. So it's going to be a fight again. I mean, to me, it's a no-brainer that non-citizens should not be able to vote at all in any election in this country. They're not a citizen. Citizenship means something. And I don't know. I'd love to hear what Kelly thinks, because I just think that constitutionally, isn't there something in the Constitution that would prohibit this?
Well, if you let non-citizens vote, then why do you even want to become a citizen? Because you have all the rights and privileges before you become a citizen.
Yeah, it's really, it's bizarre. And you don't want to be cynical, but the odds are huge that the only reason you do that is because you think you need Democrat votes, and this is the way to get votes. I think it's an appropriate response. Any place that allows non-citizens to dilute their vote doesn't deserve any resources from the United States government or anybody else. And really, it's outrageous. Because what they're doing to the citizens, they're diluting every citizen's vote. And, of course, most laws we have regarding voting is that if you're a non-citizen and you try to vote, it's like a felony.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to make it legal. It's really bizarre, but that's kind of the twisted kind of logic that we've gotten to in this country.
So it is a felony in federal elections, not for non-citizens to vote.
Absolutely. That's voter fraud.
Yeah.
And look, one of the reasons is to become a citizen in the United States, you go through a class. You learn about the country. What you find is those people who go through the process and become citizens are great Americans who, love this country, know what it's about. They're here to be a part of it. When people don't ever have to do that, they're not really Americans. They don't think of themselves as Americans. They have a totally different mindset, culture, everything, and their allegiance is to a sovereign that's not in the United States. So why you would allow them to vote is crazy. I think if we ever get to the point where we allow that, then we're done as a country.
Yeah, and really, you're going to vote your self-interest more than the country's interest if you're not a citizen and you're voting in a local election or a school election. You're basically going to be voting for other people's money to fund what you and your kids or whatever need and want.
Yes. Again, I'd love to get your comments. Should we allow non-citizens to vote? Again, if you vote at a federal level, you could actually be prosecuted. But again, some of these state elections, and I see this as sort of a camel's nose under the tent, because right now it says, okay, in San Francisco, I'll use that example since I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. This one supervisor, by the way, said it's a no-brainer. And I said, yeah, there's no brain there. But nevertheless, that you can vote if you have a child in the school district who's under the age of 19. But it only takes a second, Penna, to figure out that a liberal judge would say, well, wait a minute, that's discriminatory because why under the age of 19? If you have children, you should be able to vote. And for that matter, even individuals that don't have children get to vote in school board elections. So you can see how instantaneously they could expand that very quickly. So that's the first issue. The second one, which we've talked about in other broadcasts, I had State Senator Don Huffines on, just looking at what was happening in the state of Texas and in particular in Dallas County. Now, we are broadcasting in Dallas County right now, and he uses that example, but there are hundreds of people that they've identified who are non-citizens who have voted in an election, sometimes so regularly. One goes all the way back to 1980. Now, the only ones that they've been able to discover are the ones that reveal that to them. In other words, they get called for jury duty and they say, well, I'm not a citizen. They're saying, well, we just pulled this off the voter rolls. You just voted in the last couple elections. Oh, am I not supposed to vote? Or they pretend like this. So there are two issues. Number one, we have on the one hand, the legislators and the supervisors and the city councils and others wanting to try to have more people voting that aren't citizens. And on the other hand, because we don't have clear guidelines for elections and we don't vet some of these people, we have individuals voting that shouldn't be voting in the first place.
We try to have voter ID laws and they get struck down.
I guess that's unconstitutional to actually have a voter ID law or have a photo ID. What?
It's not. But there are judges who want to make it so. You have to show your ID to buy ice cream almost, and yet we're not going to require people to do that to do the most precious thing in the country, voting. So, it's just hard to believe the decaying brain matter that's occurring in our country. I mean, I mean, the stuff that's being
Where
talked
would
about
common
is
sense even
yeah,
go?
it's just it's gotten really, really crazy. Which again, I think this is part of the whole reason why Trump shocked everybody, because I think a lot of the country was like, "This is getting crazy."
Yes.
Let's just throw this thing upside down and get somebody that'll stop all this craziness. And so, that's the circus we're in right now. But I think there's a need for people who will stand for the truth, will stand for what's right, will speak out, and I do think there's a real opportunity right now. I think that whether you like Trump or not, even if you hate Trump, you kind of busted through the political correctness ceiling where people are able to say things now that are true. And I think that includes sharing the gospel. I think that includes telling people about Jesus. I think that includes inviting people to church. I think people feel more free being truthful and not feeling like they're going to step on somebody's toes these days because everybody was so sensitive. I think that political correctness is a really bad thing in a lot of ways, and I think the cover is off at least for a while. And so I would encourage everybody to speak the truth. It might cost more in the future, but right now it's actually acceptable, I think, a little bit to speak the truth. Do it in love, but these kinds of things, I think most people will put their arm around you and go, "Yeah, I totally agree with you. This is nuts." The idea that your kids have no right in the school not to have to take showers and dress with people of the opposite sex. I mean, I think you're going to have a 99 percentile there on these things, and you have to go someplace like San Francisco to find something different.
But again, the application point before we take a break and then we'll get into some of these religious liberty cases is to pay attention down the ballot. In the old days, it used to be I ran into evangelicals say, "Well, I vote for the president. I might even vote for the Senate." And then all of a sudden there was a wake-up call. We had a mayor subpoenaing the actual sermons of pastors. And you have, in this case, a supervisor actually saying we should let non-citizens vote. And we have, as we'll see in just a few minutes, some that are in the school district that say, we really can't allow any kind of religious instruction. We can't allow anybody to even mention the name Jesus in a baccalaureate. And all of a sudden, people started saying, we better pay attention to who's down that ballot because they're making as many, if not more, decisions that affect me and my kids than even the people at the top of the ticket.
Absolutely. And it's a lot of times it's, people from your church or your community that are the ones that are running and doing. I mean, those are the people we want. We want people that have, that believe in right from wrong, that actually think they're responsible to somebody higher than themselves, that have those kinds of values to actually be the ones implementing the policy that affect us, our children, our grandchildren. And so if you don't stand up for those people, then eventually there won't be any of those people. So I think, again, it's a unique time up and down the ballot to stand for what was right, but also to speak out and to stand for and not be intimidated out of standing for what's right and what's true.
Going to talk about religious liberty, and also, again, for those of you just joining us, we'll talk about what Kelly's going to be doing Monday. All that coming up right after this.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, "I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth." And Jim finishes, "I pray for you daily." Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Going to move on to the issue of religious liberty. But, of course, if you'd like to make a comment about something else, that is certainly appropriate as well. Penna, Dexter, Kelly, Shackelford. And before we get into these religious liberty stories, there is one that we have by Hiram Sasser on Brett Kavanaugh, one by Mike Berry about First Amendment protects community involvement of pastors, another one by Todd Starnes about an Air Force base, and then also, which one I have yet to get to, religious liberty and civil rights, having to do with kind of this whole issue as well. But Kelly, let's start off by talking about what's going on Monday. I know people kind of tune in and tune out, although I've met a lot of people who listen to all 3 hours every day, but I recognize people are busy, so some may not have heard what you're going to be doing on Monday.
Monday, the Department of Justice is holding a really, I don't know, I would probably say unprecedented, because I don't think it's happened before, but event on religious freedom. So we've got the Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, all up and down, the top people are going to be there. And it's about religious freedom and how the government can be pro-religious freedom. Of course, the Attorney General issued his guidelines, 20 guidelines, which were excellent, that were sent out to all the departments and agencies. And so there's going to, in fact, I think people can watch it. It's going to be live streamed from the Justice Department. But I was invited, and Hiram Sasser, our general counsel, will be there as well. And then after it's over, there's a time where we can actually, offer, this probably won't be on air, but it'll be a time where we can offer things that aren't going well that they could do something about on religious freedom, that maybe where the guidelines aren't being followed, and things like that, which we certainly, unfortunately, have examples of. But I've just never seen, an administration, a Justice Department, or anything that's actually been as proactive in trying to make sure that they are doing a good job with regard to religious freedom. And so I appreciate any time the government wants to sort of reach its hand out and also say, hey, we want to do what we can do. And they are doing a number of things. That's pray for that meeting and pray for results, that it results in, better policy, better government towards religious freedom.
I don't know if you covered it this week. You probably did, Kerby, but there was this ministerial and religious freedom that took place this week. And it was just wonderful to see the focus on religious freedom around the world and the persecution of Christians and other religions also around the world. And Mike Pence was there and made many, many, many good points. And, of course, out of it, I think this was influential, was that this pastor that's over in Turkey, Andrew Brunson, he was released from prison. He's in house arrest now, but he needs to, as everyone is saying, he needs to be actually sent back to the U.S. He's been kept for 2 years. But just the attention being paid to all these terrible instances of religious persecution around the world in various countries by our government, by our State Department, by Mike Pompeo himself, I thought was encouraging. So, and Kelly, I know that you were even interviewed about that and asked questions about why Trump is doing this. Why is our administration doing this now?
And we had somebody at the Mike Pompeo meeting, too, Ben Bull, who's in our D.C. office, heads our D.C. office and national advocacy. He was there. So these are unusual. This is unusual. People out there maybe you don't know. It's not normal that you actually have these different agencies, these different arms of the government that actually very much are concerned about religious freedom and are reaching out and doing these types of things. And it has a result that is very much pro-religious freedom. When you begin to speak out to these other countries, there's no telling what that does. I remember us talking about the election and people got into whether they liked Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump or whatever. And one of the types of things that people didn't think about is, Trump was saying, I'm going to kill ISIS. I'm going to crush ISIS, right? And I don't think many people thought that Hillary Clinton was going to crush ISIS, because it really hadn't happened when she was with the administration under Obama. But you know what? That makes a difference on how many Christians are murdered across the world.
Very true.
And so sometimes we don't think about these things. And us standing strong against religious freedom and against persecution of people because of their faith, does have an impact. And so I think that what Mike Pompeo, and again, if you'll remember, Mike Pompeo was really the victim of one of the more really ugly attacks in his confirmation hearing, really because of his faith and because he believed biblically about things. And here we see the result and why the enemy, the real enemy, I'm talking about the spiritual enemy, doesn't want a guy like Mike Pompeo, who's incredibly qualified, but also somebody who believes in the truths of the Bible. Because it matters, because they begin to speak out. They show examples of these people who are being persecuted. Those are powerful stories around the world, and it results in less people being persecuted and martyred around the world as well. So these things mattered. That mattered. The fact that the Department of Justice, from the very top, the Attorney General, I mean, everybody's seeing Rod Rosenstein, the second guy in charge. He's there. You keep going down the line. They're all going to be there, which shows a real commitment to religious freedom on Monday.
I just mentioned, I think it's the 6th article there gets into a little bit more. It's got a picture of Mike Pompeo, and you can read about that. My Tuesday commentary was on genocide in Nigeria, so some other issues that are relevant, in which we quote from Open Doors. And Penna, you and I both have over the years done interviews with our friends at Open Doors.
Yeah, I'm sure they're happy about this. Speaking of ugly rhetoric and attacks.
Go for it.
I saw a video this week, and many of you probably read about this. It was just Senator Cory Booker speaking to other senators about Kavanaugh and the nomination, and he said that supporting him means being complicit in evil. And, just the rhetoric coming out of him with regard to this. I mean, taking just a human being, a man who's been a judge on the D.C. Circuit for 12 years, who served in the Bush administration, and I mean, I don't know how many people really buy into this, but to hold him up as just the epitome of evil, I mean, that's where our political division has gone. It's very, very stark in a sense. And I saw Elizabeth Warren behind him, just nodding her head and agreeing with everything he was saying.
Right. Now, there's what you want to say, hold up a mirror.
Yeah.
Because
good line.
Those words, there's no doubt where those words come from. I mean, they don't come from God. Those words are so extreme, and especially when you can disagree with Brett Kavanaugh and not want him to be a judge, but to say you're complicit with evil. I mean, the guy later that night was serving the homeless at his church. He coaches his girls' basketball team. I mean, this is a real human being. I mean, that is sort of creating monsters out of people, which we know where that comes from. If you make them a monster, then you can do to them whatever you want. That comes from the pit of hell, and so that kind of, I mean, this lack of civility and all this. I mean, we know where it comes from, and we need to stand against that. Treating any other human being in that type of a way. We can have disagreements on policy and whether we think, but when you're talking about people, you've got to be very careful about sort of lowering into that type of slime, because it has results eventually to end up in violence and all kinds of things that we never want to go into in this country.
Yes. Well, again, we have a lot to cover. And by the way, a good antidote to all of that is the first article we have here by Hiram Sasser, Brett Kavanaugh and Religious Liberty. And one of the reasons I appreciate him writing that, Kelly, of course, he works with you and has been there for decades, I guess now. He's been there a long time, is that there were some people that weren't sure. And I even had one individual on this program a number of weeks ago that had a few questions about Brett Kavanaugh. I think he's resolved all of those. But for people that run into somebody saying, well, is he really going to support religious liberty? The answer is, of course he will, because you've seen him in the past do so.
Yeah, he's got a long track record. I mean, he's got 300 opinions first, so of course he's got opinions on religious liberty, which you can see. One of the things I like is almost 20 years ago, as a young attorney, he donated his time on a case with myself and Jay Sekulow at the Supreme Court on religious liberty. He did it not once, he did it 2 different times. And somebody who's rising in their career at a major law firm and is willing to sacrifice in that way, that's rare. It's not normal. Yeah. That's somebody who really is committed to religious freedom. But you look at his cases, look at the Priest for Life case, which he was excellent on that. look at the So Help Me God in the inauguration that was attacked, where he had excellent opinion there. He's look at his even oral argument questions recently in the Metro case, the Washington Metro case, where they banned an ad. You could have an ad on Christmas, but not one that mentioned Jesus. And and he I thought did an excellent job in the oral argument. And so I think everything you see about him is he's a person who's committed to the First Amendment, to religious freedom, understands the country is built upon that, and he'll do an excellent job as Supreme Court Justice.
We'll come back at a couple of other cases that you might want to know about, and then we'll be done for the day. All of this is available at our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
If you are a middle child or a parent of one or more middles, you are becoming increasingly rare. Every child born after the first and before the last is technically a middle. In an article in New York Magazine, culture editor Adam Sternberg makes the startling revelation that the American middle child is now an endangered species. He explains the demographics. As the ideal number of children per family has shrunk to 2, the middle child, in a very real sense, is disappearing. He cites a Pew Research Center study done in 1976, which found that the average mother at the end of her childbearing years had given birth to 3 or more children. Today, nearly 2/3 of women with children have 2 or 1. This is the norm across the nation and for every demographic group. Millennials are marrying later. Women are waiting longer to have children. But Adam Sternberg explains that this really boils down to what couples think they can afford. 3 kids, which a generation ago was considered a slightly smaller brood than ideal, now seems aspirational, even decadent. Most of Mr. Sternberg's article laments what we as a culture will lose as the cohort of middle children dwindles. They are natural mediators. They often have to work harder to be noticed and are more likely to take risks than the oldest or the youngest. One term that is almost never applied to middle children is spoiled. The writer wonders, do we really want a world with fewer diplomats? Or fewer hardy types whose upbringing gives them a knack for empathy? Birth order expert and popular author Kevin Lehman says that this evaporation of middle children is a loss for all of us. Middle children, he says, are like the peanut butter and jelly in the sandwich. If you like a sandwich with nothing on it, enjoy. Really good things often require a leap of faith. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, we've posted quite a number of articles. Let me again mention the one by Hiram Sasser on Brett Kavanaugh. There's one by certainly Todd Starnes about the Air Force, and we may get to that one or not, but the one I certainly wanted to focus on, Penna, is the one by Mike Berry, an individual that, of course, serves with First Liberty in the military affairs area. But this isn't really a military case as much as it is about how pastors and Christian speakers are protected. And I know we're in July, but you know what? Next month is August. Pretty soon school starts. And I know sometimes they'll bring in inspirational speakers to speak to the high school team in the midst of doing 2-a-days, or maybe they'll have a kickoff and somebody sooner or later is going to mention a Bible verse. And that's what caused the Freedom from Religion Foundation to have a slight coronary. And yet again, the First Amendment protects all of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and really, I love Mike's, the way he started the article, because as you mentioned, Kerby, this speaker, he was actually a former football player, pastor now, was asked to come in and speak to his old team.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, did he break the law? Because this letter came from the Freedom from Religion Foundation challenging the fact that he quoted Proverbs. He said, as iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another, and that was supposed to be some big violation of the Constitution. So, he saw the letter and go, did I break the law? No, he did not break the law. And the school district, Kelly, did the right thing. They ignored the Freedom from Religion Foundation. That's what a lot of districts need to be doing, isn't it?
Yep. Look, this is a guy who was asked to speak. He spoke. He didn't really even say anything religious. He just quoted something.
That was...
Whether you quote Shakespeare or the Bible or what, it's okay to quote any of those things. But the idea that because, he's a pastor and because he quoted Scripture that somehow he violated something, it's actually exactly the opposite. If the school had actually done something, censored him, banned him, whatever, because he was a pastor, or had told him, well, you can have citations to, literature, but not the Bible, or to concepts, but not biblical concepts, that would be religious discrimination. So what the Freedom from Religion Foundation is advocating is a violation of the law. It's sort of a society where religion's not allowed in public. And thank goodness our country is not the country they want. It's a country that allows free speech, freedom of religion. I think their name gives it away, Freedom from Religion. You're not free from religion, just like you're not free from other people's speech. That's part of living in a free society, is you have to see religions you disagree with. You have to see and hear speech you disagree with. But that's the only place there's freedom from religion is like the former Soviet Union. Places where it's actually, criminal, and where you put religious people in prison. So that's not our country. Our country thrives on religious freedom. And so can you have somebody come and talk to the kids at the school about character, about whatever else? Sure you can. Can it be the pastor? Sure it can. Can the pastor, or whoever, whatever speaker, mention, quote a scripture for a particular point? Sure they can. To do differently would be to discriminate. The best way I can explain this is we have lots of speech and artifacts and things in this country. Some are religious, some are secular. We don't ban all the religious ones. We realize that there's a diversity, and people are allowed to express secular thoughts just like they're allowed to express religious thoughts, and that's what freedom's all about.
And one of the things that he quotes from is the Santa Fe case, which we've talked about earlier. And that one actually was one that I don't think was a victory for religious liberty. But even in the decision, I love where Michael Berry quotes where the justices did say, by no means do these commands, and that it would be the religion clauses of the First Amendment, impose a prohibition on all religious activity in our public schools. Indeed, the common purpose of the religion clauses is to secure religious liberty. So often what you have are people that look at one clause, which is the establishment clause, and say, oh, this is going to establish religion, which I don't think it ever does. No. And they ignore the other, the free exercise. And if we believe in free exercise, that means whether you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, an atheist, a Christian, you all have the opportunity to freely exercise your religious belief or non-religious belief.
Absolutely. I would expect anybody getting up. What Connor did here is really not even close to any line. But let's say he got up and said he was giving a talk on character to the kids, and he said, my character and a lot of these things come out of my faith, and he described his own. That would be fine. I would expect a Buddhist to say the same thing, or, whatever a person's perspective is. I think we learn by learning what they believe, how they're different, how that influences him to do something good or to have a character trait that's good. That's all fine. This idea of sort of religious cleansing is one that really is opposite of what our country is about. And so I'm really grateful that we didn't have to file a lawsuit against the school district because they, discriminated against Connor in some way. They did the right thing. They took the letter or whatever they got from Freedom from Religion, threw it in the wastebasket, and that's what all government officials should do. Or if they have a question, they can call us, and we can certainly go through the law with them.
Let's talk about that for a minute. You have a resource booklet or pamphlet that's available and at First Liberty, and I have used those before, and I know Chelsea actually helped write some of those. So if you are in business or you're in the schools or wherever your venue
Military,
might be,
any
you
of them.
can actually benefit from all the work that you've already done.
Yeah, it just lays out what are your rights as a teacher in the schools. What are your rights as a student in the schools? What are your rights as a Christian in the workplace, whether you're an employer or an employee? There's protections there that are in the law that give you the freedom to live out your faith. And so a lot of this intimidation is false information. This country is built on religious freedom. Our laws protect that. So people need to know that they have those freedoms. And sometimes showing that pamphlet maybe to a boss or somebody else can help them not be so freaked out about the fact that somebody's maybe studying their Bible over lunch, or you name the issue. But all they have to do is go to firstliberty.org and click on resources, and we have those underneath there. I think the other thing we've got there, I know we talked about this today, that I didn't mention, is if people want to sign the petition to support Kavanaugh to be a Supreme Court justice, it's there as well, and share that with other people.
It pops up the first thing you'll see, so that is there as well. And Penna, I just thought I'd mention that next week we got Robert Jeffress on for a brief time because they're having the 150th anniversary. We have Gary Bauer on because Israel is in the news again, shot down a Syrian plane, and then Paul Kinger is on talking about some of those issues as well. But just before we wind down, again, your commentary today is just a reminder, and I would encourage people to take the time to sign up to get the commentaries, but it's just a reminder that if nothing else, we seem to be kind of in this demographic winter, and we don't have these middle children anymore. We need these middle children. We need more than one or two children.
We need more children.
We just simply need more children, and so your commentary today is something I would point people to as well.
Well, you can read it. Just sign up at pointofview.net, and you can get both Kerby's and mine.
So, again, that's available. Kelly was talking about his resources. Let me encourage you to do that because my commentaries come to you Monday through Friday in your inbox, and Penna's will come to you on Saturday. We also had, of course, Jerry Tuma on this week, and we still have the Cornerstone Report. And I've had a number of people just saying, what about this? We've been talking about the trade wars, and we're wondering about how the economy is going. The stock market's doing well, but Jerry says, before it's all through, it's going to hit a top, and then maybe it might decline. So we want you to just know a little bit more about some of his analysis. So, again, we've made that free to you as well, and all of it available at the website, pointofview.net. Now, we give away a lot of free material, and we're glad to do so, but you recognize there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you can click on that button to help us out financially, that would be greatly appreciated as well. And I hope everybody have a great weekend. I know Kelly's probably going to go to a movie. I think I'll do the same. And Penna, thank you for being here and sitting in this table from time to time to help us out.
Well, it's a lot of fun, and I hope everybody has a great weekend.
Amen.
Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.